Welcome back to Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And this week, for a guest, we've got Adam Barney, a fellow author and consultant in the Boston market who works a lot in the startup community. I'm sure he can do a far better job than I did of introducing himself. Adam, why don't you take the mic?
Thank you so much, Jerry. It's great to be here today. Again, hi, everybody. I'm Adam W. Barney. I'm an energy coach, and I'd love to say that energy coaching is about mystical stones and sorcery. But of course, it's about really how I've helped hundreds of emerging and executive leaders unlock their goals, maintain that energy, build systems, and drive long-term transformation through that. But I come from an over 2-decade experience in leadership positions at companies like Microsoft, Digitas, and Akamai Technologies, and that brings a wealth of knowledge, obviously, to my coaching practice. And I truly believe that the two tools of optimism and autonomy can empower us to overcome challenges, seize opportunities, and really build confidence and resilience. As Jerry mentioned, I'm in the Boston area, but I live specifically in Dorchester with a wife, 2 young daughters, 2 dogs, state of controlled chaos, and music drives that sanity and allows me to maintain my own daily energy. I'm also the author of a book, as Jerry mentioned, called Make Your Own Glass Half Full, which is the path to empowered optimism and autonomy, tying directly to those things that I mentioned a moment ago.
Given your home setup, the only thing I doubt in what you just said is the word controlled.
That's the mindset piece, though. The control is the mindset piece, Jerry.
100% yes. 100% yes. Gosh, that's an exciting background, Adam. So a couple things you said that stuck out for me right off the bat. First, a little self-deprecating joke, folks. So some of you may know this. It's come up in other calls. Before we record, I always do a quick session with the person I'm going to talk to, so we have an idea of where we're going to go in an otherwise organic conversation. And Adam had said the same thing then, and he said now, introduce himself more fully. We actually met at Boston Startup Week, great event by Startup Boston as always. And he made the comment about magical stones. And in my mind, I thought he was talking about Reiki and Japanese energy healing. And I totally went in the wrong direction with the initial part of our conversation. So with that error aside, tell me a little bit more. It sounds to me like a lot of what you do is help founders, leaders with their mindset so that they're coming at their problems from the right place. Is that accurate?
That's exactly right. And really, I feel like that mindset work comes down to resilience, right? So much of it is about staying on that path towards the future. And then it's also about kind of taking a focus away with founders and executive leaders of the idea, really moving from scarcity in that mindset to abundance in terms of that energy. And a lot of the coaches, a lot of the people that I've coached over the years, they come through tough times. And a big piece of that is that there's always an opportunity for growth when you're able to reframe those challenges. So that's one big part that ties back to that resilience. But it's also just about how you manage your own personal energy, right? Because that's something that we all can actually control. I love to frame up that mindset and that way of thinking actually about there are a few things, Jerry, in the world that level set every human on this earth. And I love with people who come from diverse backgrounds, no matter, where they grew up, where they went to school, what their experience is. If they've got an idea that they can bring forward to the world that's going to actually change the game a little bit, that's an opportunity to step in and guide them on that. So manage your own energy. It's not just about time management, but of course, productivity comes into it. It's about where you spend your energy determines the impact you can make. And I love to use tools that I've found to be highly powerful in my own journey, including Ikigai, which is the Japanese concept for reason for being that ties together 4 aspects and sort of a Venn diagram perspective of what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. So when you talk about people who are early in the stage of their entrepreneurial journey, that can help guide them towards where those experiences across the holistic nature of themselves come into play for the impact they can make on the world. I then actually love to pull in another tool that works complementary to that. And I will say, Jerry, knowing that we're both parents also, I find it interesting. If I've had clients who struggle with filling out that Ikigai, one of my biggest recommendations, if they have kids that are over probably 8 to 10 years old, hand the kids a blank copy of your ikigai and have your kids fill it out, because I think they can push you in a direction to understand yourself a little bit more. But again, I mentioned, there's another tool. I love to also frame up after the ikigai work very quickly and soon after that with what's called an Odyssey plan. And an Odyssey plan is this idea that I've stumbled across where I take my clients and I ask them to look 5 or 10 years in the future. So it's that big picture, 30,000-foot view, and then come up with 3 options. The first option is what you're doing right now remains consistent. You stay on that path. The second option that sort of speaks in an alternative angle from what I mentioned up front about resilience, though, is that the second option is option one just disappears. So it's about what's the alternative that you would build. And then the third option is a fun one to even tease out more ideas. It's this idea of no limitations, no constraints. If you didn't have family obligations or monetary, things that you needed to do, what would you do? Where would you go? What would you build? And those 3 frameworks, when you start to lay them out next to each other, open up those bigger paths of the goals of where you can make an impact on the world. And then with the transformational nature of my energy coaching practice, it's about how you step back from that to then, because you have to design the systems that any of those goals that you go down, need to sit within. So designing those systems, taking those big goals and then breaking them down, right? I imagine any founder or entrepreneur, think of, for instance, Michelangelo, the famous Italian sculptor. And if you're someone who's a founder, an entrepreneur, you're trying to build something or you're growing your leadership, in terms of an executive career, think of that as a 3-ton piece of marble that's set down right in front of you. And then how many small chisel marks does it take to turn that big block of marble into a beautiful statue? That's where I love to come in and keep people energized and accountable towards those goals. So that's
Let,
yeah.
yeah, let me pause you there. That's a lot to unpack. So, dialing all the way back to the beginning of what you said about mindset, I've read at this stage in my life well over 100 business and leadership books. And there's a reason why nearly every one of them starts with your mindset and abundance over scarcity. And that's quite simply, if your head isn't right. I love the way Zig Ziglar used to talk about the 6 inches between your ears. If your head isn't right, your opportunity for success is extremely limited.
Right. Right.
So
And
I
it's
think
also
that's such.
I'm also a believer in that, Jerry, that some of the most creative people who've made an impact on the world, they're crazy geniuses. You know what I mean? Like, you have to have, it's an abundance moment, but it's also a trust in that abundance of what you have. And it's about trusting what's inside yourself, that actually, that does count for something. And it's also, part of it comes into, I think, what you and I have both built, what we've both done, and what we've connected on before. There's some aspect of not worrying about what other people think, right? You've got your own unique set of experiences, no matter where you come from, what you've gone through from a corporate or a non-corporate or a building and a founding and entrepreneurial mindset. Those experiences build into that next level of where your path evolves into.
100%. And you said another thing that's important, and that's the confidence to believe that you can make a difference. Again, going back to the beginning of all of those books, mindset and belief. If you don't believe that you can make a change, again, you're going to struggle to. You mentioned Ikigai, which I'm a huge advocate of. I actually write about it sometimes on LinkedIn. It's such a powerful way to look at the world. I love that. And your Odyssey piece, I'd like to spend some time there. Again, I know I'm quoting books like a crazy nerd librarian, but one of my favorite business books of all time is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It
Yep.
is not a fascinating read. It's dry as saltines in the Sahara Desert, but it's also one of the most powerful books I've ever read. And one of the things that Dr. Covey says that's critical is beginning with the end in mind. And if you take that Odyssey approach you're describing, and you're starting to lay out what the long-term vision, really is, then it's easier for you to make decisions that support growth in that direction. Is that what you
Right.
found with your clients? Or
Yeah, that is totally a piece of it, and it's I'm also a big believer in the fact that if you bring, for instance, you just mentioned one of your favorite books. One of the best books that I've read over the last few years takes a different angle on this, but it's called Humor Seriously.
could you
I don't
say
know
that
if you've
again? What
stumbled.
was the title?
Humor Seriously. It's a book that's really the subtitle on it is Why Humor is a Secret Weapon in Business and Life.
I love that.
For me and my own mindset of where I come from, it was one of the most transformative books that I can read. I've always led teams. I mean, I've led teams of over 20 people. I've worked with clients that are, spending over $30 million a year. I've, communicated with C-suite people within those organizations. And I found that the best leaders come out there with that. It's not necessarily humor straight up. It's more about levity and understanding
Yes.
that there is a holistic human behind it.
Yes.
Talk about an entertaining read, though. I think I would recommend you add to your list,
I
though.
think
Um,
I'll read it right before I reread Seven Habits to help me get in the mindset to deal with that dryness.
yeah, and it's written by two fantastic professors, that come out of California, Naomi Bognadas and Jennifer Aiken. So it's a wonderful, wonderful book that inspired me in my own sort of journey over the last couple of years. But it's always been that mindset of the leadership that I've had, and I've worked within organizations and under leaders that are great leaders. For instance, I mentioned in my bio, I worked at Microsoft. I was there in the early days of working under a leader like Satya Nadella. Even though I was the most miniature little needle in a multiple hundreds of thousands person environment, you could feel that sage, positive leadership drip down from the top. And that's a powerful place to be in the middle of, no matter how you're operating or where you are in the organization, to take some inspiration from.
Yeah, again, circling back to the overarching theme of mindset, I think having a sense of humor in the ability to inject a small amount of levity to a serious situation shows a level of confidence that
Mm,
inspires the people around you to have faith in
right,
you. At least that's what I
right,
found. Again, to your point, you don't want to be the Joker from Batman or a stand-up comic. That's not this at all. But but
right.
but having the confidence to be your authentic self and bring some levity is room changing.
And I think one of the tools, I agree with that came into play early in my corporate career that I love to talk about. I worked in the ad agency world in those early days of my corporate career, and we used to sit a full team. I was on the digital marketing team. We would sit in a conference room with generally about 40 of us around there, and it was everywhere from the executive leaders down to the most junior people on the team. Talk about a way to breed some of that confidence. We used to do this thing called PowerPoint roulette, and you would sit in front of a team. The leaders on the team would put together usually an 8-slide PowerPoint deck that had just random images in a random order on it. And you would actually be challenged to get up there in front of the room. And I've gone through enough other storytelling training across my corporate career. This was so informal and fun because you would raise your hand, get to go up in front of the room, and you'd have to tell a cohesive story about these insanely unconnected pictures on each of these slides and connect it together. And I just mention it because it's something I go back to all the time. It's a powerful way for people to give the confidence, to build that confidence, right? To be able to tell that story, even though, you should probably have your BS alarm go off when you're trying to, work in a marketing environment and going through something like that. But it gives you that confidence that you can actually tell a cohesive story, even if you don't have the background in your back pocket.
I couldn't agree more. The ability to effectively tell a story is whether or not a startup is going to succeed. Period. Full stop. The part of the reason why there's a 93% failure rate in the space is, in my opinion, a lot of founders don't have the business fundamentals necessary, so they make poor choices that lead to an end before they really had a chance to begin. But setting
Right.
that piece aside, the next most important thing is to be able to tell a compelling story about your user and their journey through the lens of your product or service. And if you
Right.
can do that effectively, you're light years ahead of the competition.
And I think there's a piece of that that comes into play. Obviously you're going to go out and design effective products by picking things that actually have a customer need, right? You
Of
see you
course.
see a niche, you see a hole, but it's about always going back to what that original inspiration is. I think a lot of founders, especially when they start to fail, they have their blinders on, but they're pulled away from that original idea. And when, I've stepped in with a lot of founders to keep them accountable. And this goes back again to mindset, but it's if you stay walking on that path forward, eventually that path, without too much navigate, don't go off to the left, don't go off to the right so much, stay right in the center. And as much as that path maybe is going to take a long time and feel like it's just down, 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 eventually it starts to head up towards the top of success. But you have to stay in that mindset where you originally were positioned and iterate and pivot, but stay towards whatever that initial goal that you had in mind is. And I think that's where a lot of founders get thrown off, is maybe, it's important to take customer feedback, obviously into play, but your original mission is filling something that you identified early on. Just don't lose sight of that, is really what I'm trying to say, Jerry.
For sure. And you added the ask and iteration piece, and I'm glad you did, because that's the one thing that I would have added to what you'd said, is that as a founder, you need blinders from the distractions, but inside of those blinders are your target market. And
Right.
the people who are actually going to hand you money, they quite obviously deserve a seat at the table. And that's the feedback you want the most. Not your cousin, not your neighbor, not your buddy in the community. Again, all valid voices. I'm not saying to ignore them, but the voice that should scream the loudest is the one trying to hand you a check.
Correct. And it's about listening to those voices. That does tie back though to something else that I recommend, for executives and leaders that I coach. It's having that board of advisors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a board of advisors is different than, if you're running a bigger company, the board you have, it's different than your co-founder. It's different than these strategic people, but that board of advisors are people who should know you a little bit better. They shouldn't be someone we met at Startup Boston Week, of course. I'd love to have you as a board of advisors, Jerry, but you don't know me deeply enough quite yet at this point to really guide in that sense. And there are people that you could have gone to college with, or people that you worked with early in your career that you keep in your back pocket. And I'm talking about maybe 3 to 5 at the most, people that as a founder you connect with. Maybe it's every quarter or 6 months, and you just give them an update on where you're headed. And they can keep you honest to move, that you're moving in the right direction of what is guiding you. And they can also give a little bit of feedback to help you navigate and make sure that you're staying on that path. But that board of advisors is something I highly recommend my clients set up. Even as a coach, that takes some of the work away from me, but that board of advisors that you can rely upon is important, because it gives you that opportunity to get some of that feedback from not necessarily like the 5 goals this quarter I'm trying to hit in building a business, but about the strategic way that you're moving your business forward and keeping it aligned. There are also people that you can use to say, the first time you do this, the first year I've started this, I need to do an annual report for myself, and these are people that you can send that to validate and to get that feedback from.
Yeah,
But they're not the people who should be guiding how you evolve your product either. There's a balance there to be had.
for sure. I couldn't agree more with everything you said. I don't want to dig too deep in it because I legitimately feel a board of advisors could be an entire episode on its own. But I will say this: I agree with everything you said. Interestingly, especially about our meeting. So we met at Boston Startup Week. We're both authors. We had tables next to each other in the author event, and that was great. That's how we met. So that's a beginning. We met at essentially a networking event. So that's a beginning.
Right.
So I would be a bad choice, or you would be a bad choice for me as well, to be a startup advisor for our firms. but it's a good beginning. So you meet somebody in an event like this, a relationship develops, you discover some things about them that lead you to believe that they would be a good advisor. Maybe they're further down the same journey. Maybe they built something similar. Maybe they've got the ability to give you access to a community you wouldn't otherwise have.
Right.
Whatever it is, you see that value, add them. But the critical part is, just because we had tables next to each other and did a show together doesn't mean we have the depth of knowledge to offer that level of uncensored detail. One of the things I really caution my clients about is not giving someone uncensored access or feedback to your core. It's just
Right.
uncovering that level of, in today's day and age, there's a lot less privacy and a lot more weight given to being vulnerable and exposing weakness publicly. And I can see the value in some extent, but you're also opening yourself up to a lot of pain from people that don't, some of them flat out don't have your best interest at heart, but far more common, they just don't have the right information to be useful.
Right.
And I think this is one of those things.
Yeah, it's about the context, right? That people who understand you different. But you bring up a good thing about networking, because networking, in my belief, is also an extension of mindset, right? Right? We're all trying to build genuine relationships. It's not about being transactional,
Yes.
but it's important. For instance, when you and I met, and especially for early stage founders and entrepreneurs, you need to build up that network as well, because those are the people who can be your first clients or can provide. I threw out my own, career and my journey of building 2 businesses now. I don't love the people who are just yes people. I love the people who come and challenge me, and it doesn't affect me personally. Maybe sometimes it ungrounds me, but I look at that as it's a kick in the pants, right? That we all need sometimes to make action and make our beliefs and building these businesses come true. But you need that little bit of a kick sometimes from a feedback perspective to be able to
Yes.
jumpstart you, right?
Absolutely. And to
And
break
that
you out of the rut.
difficult, that constructive. Some people think of it as difficult feedback. It can be hard to take at first, but again, if you're grounded in the idea of where your ikigai, for instance, just to live in that model a little bit more, sits, someone can come in and tell you completely that you're going the wrong direction, and you're going to let that roll off your shoulders and know that if you're being driven by what's inside yourself, you're moving in a direction that's valuable. And but that's a perspective that comes with time. Most people aren't born with that. You have to go through challenges in your life to understand how you recover from them. That's a lot of what I write about in my book, right? Make Your Own Glass Half Full, is the fact that if you're grounded and confident in where you're headed, no matter how dark a day feels or how thick the clouds are, you're always going to be able to recover from that. So it's kind of it's a funky place to play. It's not it's a little bit obtuse. It's a little unclear because it's at a personal level of where your feedback loop, what you're open to. But critical feedback is important because that's what helps drive that iteration and that ability to change over time and shift slightly one way or another.
Absolutely. And the ability to take feedback is a necessary prerequisite for any leadership role, but
Right.
double so for being a founder. It's interesting. I like to use marriage counseling as an example. People need marriage counselors. Marriage counseling exists as an industry because 2 otherwise intelligent people are too close to a problem to be able to get resolution. And this trained counselor is able to look at those, pull them away, and remind those people about the things that they love and like about each other, and get them to see past the ends of their nose. And that's really, that ability to get feedback is akin to that. As a founder, you will be working 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, grinding on your startup. And sometimes that problem is so close that it's obvious to people outside of that rut you've walked yourself into. But for you, you can't see it. So developing, to your example earlier, a board of advisors, or being a part of a community of like-minded founders, like Boston Startup, like the Boston Founders Group, like my friend Trenton's group, Thrive, my friend Eric's group, um, my friend Trenton's group, Tried, my friend Eric's group, Thrive. I hate that two of my friends started startup communities with such similar names because I flip them in my head all the time. Anyway, guys, you know who you are. But those groups can be powerful because you're hearing other people with similar problems doing similar things that aren't this close to your problem, which can be huge. And to the point that we're going to get to shortly as well, it's a great networking opportunity.
Right. Right. And it's important within those networks, right, to be able to find the right people. I mean,
Yes.
I'm someone who I think everyone, Jerry, in this world has a superpower. My superpower is networking, and but it's more than just building networks. It's about enabling collisions that happen within that network. So that's also another aspect of, coaching uh, startup founders and, executive leaders, is the fact that not everyone has that as their superpower. So I can help people navigate that and use the strategies that I've led with to build my own networking superpower to help enable more of that within them. But it's really about being thoughtful. I mean, you mentioned, founder communities. I'm part of Matt Gray's Founder OS community. I'm in way too many other communities because I value those networks and those collisions. But when you find the communities, whether it's a founder community or I'm in one that's it's a wild network of 12,000 fractional executives, it's you'd find those people who are aligned with you. And if you step in with that same intentionality of people joining a community, and this is something that I think you and I have both seen across our corporate careers and building these businesses, the communication that you have to extend across all borders in the world is unbelievably powerful these days. And no matter how niche you might be working in terms of what you're building or what you're working in, you can find a network out there of supportive people who are, well aligned and sort of thinking in that Venn diagram mindset. They're not completely the same as you, but there's enough crossover to drive that intentionality forward. That's how you take some of those relationships that maybe are initially feeling transaction based, right? They're transitory. They're not really transformative. That's where you can get to that next level of the depth of relationship, and how you can take those pieces and use them really valuably over the long term. And one of the strategies there, this goes back to something you said earlier, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it, but it's some part of building a network, especially across virtual communities and connected communities that are more broadly reaching, is dangling some value out there without expecting anything in return.
Yes.
That's a difficult piece to think about, but also you hear about it time and time again with founders, people who are entrepreneurs or solopreneurs, especially in the realm of like a lead magnet, right? A lead magnet can bring someone in, and it's important to build those things because that's how you grow your owned audience. And an owned audience is so important and critical no matter what you're trying to build to grow into. But if you can maintain that owned audience and grow that intentionality of the people you're networking with, then that impacts the success path that you're on as well.
100%. There's two parts of what you said that I'd love to dig into as we're talking about networking. I'm going to do the second one first just because I think it's a little quicker.
Sure.
Especially in the type of businesses that you and I have, adding value without an expectation of return shows an authentic giving nature that's appealing to people around you. I have done countless free consulting sessions with startup founders that I know full well going into it aren't yet at a developmental stage where they can afford my services. And I'm
Right.
okay with that. Some of those folks will come back in 6 months. Some of them I'll never hear from again. But
Yep.
but going all the way back to your talk about Ikigai, I truly passionately love this space. watching somebody else's startup blow up fills me with joy. So when I read about somebody on LinkedIn or wherever and how great they're doing, even if we never work together, just knowing I get to talk to them and provide a little bit of direction, I get legitimate joy from. So for me, I am going to get a reward. And
Yep.
some small percentage of them will become clients, and that's great. But I love that part. The second part, and what I really want to focus on, and I'm going to stop talking and let you talk. You and I spend time in communities more than I would recommend most should. Um, but our
Great.
needs for that community are different than most. So if you're a startup, say a tech startup, or it doesn't really matter what, but not in a serving the community type of business like you and I have, say a product business, for example, what do you recommend that people look for when they're looking to go out networking or join a community?
I mean, I think there's two ways to do this. Locally in the Boston market, obviously I think we know through events like Startup Boston Week and, the fact that we have the Venture Lane right here, and you've got the CIC, the Cambridge Innovation Center, that does, all of their activity of helping to support. It's finding those things that'll help you with that, right? It's Startup Boston Week. Stephanie does a great job putting together accelerator programs. I noticed today she just announced that Startup Boston has their first directory, which is around accelerator programs. Not every accelerator program is going to be right for every business, but it's finding those ones that you can get involved with and building connections. For instance, the CIC, they have these accelerator programs. Some of them are for social impact businesses. That's a pretty niche it's a pretty solid niche that's growing. That support comes through that. You can apply as a startup to get involved in that ecosystem, and that elevates you. Or, they've got an early stage company cohort, and a lot of these are popping up more broadly in the world. In my own journey, I went through a business accelerator program in early 2021 that was part of the Morning Brew ecosystem. And, that ended up becoming a program with 4,000 global alumni. It doesn't exist anymore. That's for different business reasons that are out there. But that opened me up to this community that gave me an opportunity to take these ideas for building my energy coaching business and say, oh, I actually can do this, and get that supportive community around me. That said, there are endless numbers of accelerator communities out there that you can become a part of, whether they're local to Boston or they're virtual around the world. And if you're open to it, and again, it's about your personal goal and your intention to step into that and be moldable and learn from it, then that ends up opening up the value. But those accelerator programs, communities of founders, again, I agree, you and I are the kinds of people who are in way too many communities, and I need to pull back sometimes. But I get so much value out of connecting with these founders who are all over the world. It's what really drives me. And you see so much great activity happening in areas that maybe 10 years ago no one was thinking about. I became early involved with an organization that's based out of Indianapolis. It's called Powder Keg. They bring together all of the tech startup activity happening outside of Silicon Valley. But you've seen here in the US, especially over the years, and this has been exacerbated by COVID, of course, you've got all of this fantastic talent that's ending up in these second, third tier cities in the US. And there's an opportunity for them to step in at a lower cost, for office space and cost of living, whatever the case might be. But it all connects together. And that Powder Keg network is really a strong community to take those startup founders in Miami and Columbus, Ohio, and not so much even here in Boston. Boston's not Silicon Valley, it's not New York, but we've got a lot of great activity and a strong ecosystem, as we heard about at Startup Boston Week here. There are emerging networks all over the world that are coming to support founders and entrepreneurs, and putting that little bit of energy in the back pocket to say you can make an impact on the world and build a network. And if you find, again, it's about intentionality of community. If you're stepping into those communities that have that, that's gonna elevate your ability to succeed and get that feedback from really strong people who have that same mindset.
Yeah, and you know, those are all great ones. Another thing I'd add to that is instead of focusing on your company's size as the source of things to network with, look at your industry. So, like, for example, if you're in technology services, there's things like TechServe Alliance, IT Serve. If you're in government contracting, there's AFCEA, there's DISA. And when you join a group like that that's aligned to your industry, you get the benefit of seeing people that are well ahead of you on the journey that you're growing into, as
Right.
well as best practices that are very specific to what you're doing. And that can be powerful. And as a related benefit in nearly all of those different associations, number one, they've almost always got national conferences. So you've got an excuse to get away to somewhere nice to spend 3, 4 days. But number two, they almost always have startup groups within them.
Right.
So you can talk to people that are in your business vertical and also in your business life cycle, and that can be incredibly powerful.
Right. That's something that's a great point because I've always been, because I come from a deep marketing background, I have always been a believer that you can learn so much from your competition that's out
100%.
there. And I don't just look at your competition. I work with a lot of micro business owners who own brick and mortar, very small businesses here across the US also. They have a different mindset than some of the tech startup founders that I have in terms of how they operate. But, if you're operating a, gosh, I was coaching a woman the other day who she owns a high end bakery in Jacksonville, Florida, right? And she's trying to take this idea of this thing that's called cake in a can and bring it to the big box provider. Bring it to Walmart, bring it to Target, get it into Whole Foods. And there's no one doing it like what she's doing, but she goes, well, I think a couple people, this inspiration came from people I saw doing this in Japan. And I really want to innovate in this space. And she goes, I don't really know how to grow it. And I'm like, well, go to those people who, go to the websites of these bigger providers over there, learn from it. You can get something from either understanding how to scale up or get the inspiration for how you level up your own business through looking at your competition and using what they're doing as ideas, not to replicate, but to use as inspiration for how you build your own business. And I think that's applicable. That's agnostic of industry. That's agnostic of tech, non-tech. It's a thing that we can each use though to impact our value of how we can deliver something that does impact the world and does it in the right way.
100%. And I think people need to be reminded occasionally that competitor and enemy are spelled different because they're different words with different meanings.
Right.
Iron sharpens iron. Having strong competitors can be and should be a net positive. There will
Right.
always be people in your industry, in your space that are enemies. That just the way they do business maybe is bad or something about them you dislike. But that should be a very small minority in your other competitor group. And that competitor group, heck, some of the best roundtables I've been on have had active competitors on them. And while we don't talk about direct client details, you can learn so much from your competitor who's a similar sized business in a similar market. So much.
Right. Right. And if you're connecting with people, even if they're an enemy and they're a founder who's open to connecting, like that's not a bad conversation to have. One of the early things that I realized also is the worst answer you're going to get in so many situations is no.
For sure.
And I think it takes time again to build that resilience, build that shell, or build that callus about hearing no and getting tough feedback. No is one of the most valuable things you can get, and if you get a no, like who cares? For lack of a better term, someone says no, that stinks, but then 9 times out of 10 you get a no, but, and then you get a little bit of help there, and that's also a thing to take advantage of. And it shouldn't be scary to get that no. It should be an okay thing that we roll through it and we iterate from it.
100% no but, or nearly as valuable as no why is
Right.
understanding why no came from. That's great. No, I think that this is a great talk. I would love at some point in the future to have you back on the show to talk about advisory groups, because that's an area many startups do it. I don't want to pretend like you and I just invented a new wheel, but it is an area that I don't think gets a lot of attention. Number one, I don't think enough companies do it, but number two, I think of those that do, they don't really think through the composition of that board, and they fall into the trap that we started to elaborate on.
Right. Right. I agree. You can end up also, if your board of advisory, your advisory group isn't providing that feedback, you need to shake up who's on that advisory.
100%.
We could probably talk about that for another 40 minutes though, about how you execute on that and how you iterate. And the other important thing from a mindset perspective and just a holistic human perspective is we evolve over time. We're
Yes.
there's no point where we're stopping evolving until the day, our last day on earth, the day we die. That's when we stop evolving. We change over time. And going back to even what you were saying about marriage counseling, in that partnership perspective, you're evolving as you grow into that relationship. And you've got the ripples change in the ocean, right? The effect changes over time and the weather changes and the tides go up and down. So those ripples feel different at different points in the journey.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Growth is a process, not an event. And the visual representation I've always loved. I'm a lifelong martial artist. And one of the things that we learned and always taught students was you need to maintain a student beginner mindset no matter how long you train. Because when
Yep.
you stop growing and developing, you start regressing. And the
Right.
visual example we used in traditional karate and judo, you have a white, a green, a brown, and a black belt. So you go from white to green, green to brown, brown to black. But that black belt, though it's your final belt, over time it fades and frays, and you know what happens? It starts to turn white again. It legitimately, that's the truth. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's such a great visual representation of what you're describing.
That is amazing. I mean, that's a great way to look at it. I one of the best things that I've found, and this is included in my book. I luckily got approval to use this. It's a visualization of life paths, and it comes from Tim Urban is his name. It's from Wait But Why is the Twitter handle on it. It's just this great timeline chart that I think ties to that same idea, Jerry, of you're born is back here. You've got today in the middle. There's a black line with a bunch of green lines that just navigate on the before today. And then it's the same thing, but they're all green lines. And it just shows that today we can navigate and we can meander on that up and down. But the ping pong nature of how life evolves drives that path, and you never know what doors that can open. Even if you've reached so many closed doors in the past, that doesn't mean that those closed doors that you hit are gonna continue to be closed, in the future. And if you hit more closed doors, I actually think that the ability to have multiple open doors later on becomes more likely.
I couldn't agree more. And I feel like that's a great place to wrap up today's show. So Adam, you shared an enormous amount of wisdom. I know people are going to be interested in hearing more about your book, so make sure you include that. But how is it that folks can get in touch with you to learn more about you, the services you provide, and of course your book?
Sure. LinkedIn would be the first place. I'd love to connect. Again, I'm built on networks and I extend that network, so, Adam W. Barney on LinkedIn. You can also find me on my website, which is www.adamwbarney.com. And then my book, of course, it's Make Your Own Glass Half Full, The Path to Empowered Optimism and Autonomy. It's available worldwide. You can find it on Amazon, but, LinkedIn is the primary place I'd love for people to find and connect and help to drive some of those additional collisions in the world that I love to enable.
That's awesome. And as always, for new listeners to the show, all the locations Adam just shared will be in the show notes. So if you're driving down the Mass Pike, please don't contribute to the traffic by getting into an accident. Try to write that down. Just check the show notes when you get where you're going. And thanks always for listening, folks. Between now and next week, make sure you're building amazing things and running great companies. We'll talk to you next week. Bye, Adam.
Bye, Jerry. Thank you.